Welcome to The Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio, helping you move forward with focus, hope, and confidence, saving you time, money, and your sanity as you build a better life post-divorce. I'm Steve Peck. Deborah Moskovich, divorce consultant, educator, and author of The Smart Divorce, brings you the leading experts and researchers in the divorce arena. We'll also speak with those in the trenches, people who've learned from their divorce and how their experience has changed their lives. And they would tell you for the better. Divorce can be a beginning, even if it looks like an end, and rich in opportunity to learn and grow from. And on the Smart Divorce Radio Show, we'll explore how to create a positive outlook post-divorce life. And now, here's Deborah.
Hello, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Deborah?
I'm very well. We have another guest today whose name is Stephen.
Oh, another Steve.
Another Steve.
All right.
Anyhow, divorce is a pretty emotional time. There's anger, frustration. There's a kaleidoscope of emotion. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it makes good people do bad things. But it also can bring out the worst in people that may be able to keep their bad behavior at bay, especially those with the personality disorder. It could exacerbate things, just make it worse.
You bet.
What I want to talk about today is what happens when you're faced with the adversity from the other side. There's crazy-making behavior, deceptions, lies, and so on. Sometimes it gets so frustrating that you feel that you're doing all the right things and you're not, the other side isn't, and you just want to see justice and you don't get it. And I've been there, and I also have clients that are there that want to tell these little white lies because they know that it's, you're not necessarily getting truth from the other side, or there's some harassment, but, it can come back to bite you. So what do you do? And we've got the right guest for this because it's a very centered problem. Stephen Benmor is our guest, and I've gotten to know Stephen well over the last few years working with AFCC, and I've talked about this organization before because their mission is to create a justice system in which all professionals work collaboratively with education, support, and access to services to achieve the best possible outcome for children and divorce. And, Stephen and I sat on the board together, and I've heard him speak, and he is so smart. I've got a lot of respect for him. He's incredibly knowledgeable, passionate about his work, and compassionate towards his clients. And, on this topic where it's tricky, I thought that he would be the best person to help guide us.
Well, let's get him on the air. Steve, welcome to Divorce Source Radio's The Smart Divorce.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
I'm glad to be here.
So tell us, what do you do? What happens when you've got personality disorder on the other side and it's high conflict, or maybe not even high conflict, but what do you do?
Well, for those of us that are in this business day in and day out, really what we have to stand back and recognize is that when you're in the family law or the divorce law business, you're really in relationship breakdown business, meaning everybody that's walking in our office and all the people that we're serving are people that suffered or are in the middle of suffering the breakdown of a relationship. And in many cases, these people don't just have one breakdown of a relationship. They may have had a breakdown with a relationship with their parents, then with their children, and also with their spouse. Sometimes it's actually much wider than that. Sometimes it's problems in relationships at work, with their employer, with their colleagues, with their siblings. So it's not shocking that people that go through a divorce or a separation have had more than one relationship breakdown. And so then the question becomes, well, so what? How is that relevant, and how do we assist these people? Now, not always, but in some cases, the problem that brought about the separation or divorce is because of one person, although many times people say it takes two to tango. But when we're dealing with what you're saying, Deb, the notion of a personality disorder, now we're talking about something that's clinical, something that a psychologist or psychiatrist can actually perform a test on that person and determine that they actually have something that has a name, a label. And they could say it's because of this person's disorder that they are behaving this way. They're oppositional, they're paranoid, they are distrustful, they are aggressive. And we don't see that in the field of practice. We don't get the clinical diagnosis per se. All we know is my client is hard to serve, or my client has left a relationship where the other person is behaving in a very strange way. I use the word strange because that's the language of non-clinicians when it comes to things like personality disorders. So back to your question, Deb, what do you do? Well, the reality is people are actually better off in the legal system dealing with either a former spouse who has a personality disorder, or in some cases the former spouse who has a personality disorder with a lawyer who she or he has chosen to represent him or her, who also is behaving in a way that causes us to question whether they themselves are stable. And by the way, it's not uncommon. People find lawyers that match their persona.
Exactly. So just a minute. So when you say the legal system, does that mean that you're saying that they should go to court rather than mediate?
No, but
okay.
Let's step back for a second. So court, mediation, arbitration, meeting at the local coffee shop to resolve things through negotiation, having everybody sit in a room together with the lawyers to negotiate a deal. All those are ways to resolve a dispute.
Right.
Some are more expensive, some are cheaper, some are more amicable, some are more adversarial. Of course, court being the most adversarial one. But before we even get to which model we use to resolve the dispute, let's take a step back. When we're dealing with somebody in a relationship with someone who has a personality disorder, and they're living together, and he goes home or she goes home, and it's utter chaos. The home, it's like we've used the word walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
So there's a person in a relationship somewhere right now who's coming home, and there is going to be hell. There's going to be fighting. There's going to be accusations. There's going to be words thrown or objects thrown. And in some of these homes, there's children there, and they're seeing this. And they're not splitting up. They're actually together right now. Well, one of them has a personality disorder in our little example here.
Yeah.
What's the remedy? And don't tell me the answer is divorce. What's the remedy? The remedy is, sweetheart, I love you. This can't continue anymore. We need help. Or another way to say it is, you need help. But let's just say we need help.
We sounds better.
We need help.
The politically correct thing to say.
So the we need help really is a way of saying, look, we've got a problem. I'm not pointing any fingers. And the people out there in the world that we live in that can help us, these are people that have social work degrees, psychology degrees, medical degrees, but we need to go to them. What happens in that relationship where the person says, I'm not doing that, it's not my fault, it's your fault, it's not my problem, it's your problem.
The blamer.
That's right. So in those situations, there's very little remedy to the person who, let's call that person the normal or healthy person, and the other person is the person that requires some assistance, some mental health, clinical assistance, maybe therapy and medication, maybe some combination of all of the above. I don't know. But when you have a relationship that's going on right now where it's an unhealthy, toxic relationship, and the person refuses to, together or apart, seek assistance, there's no remedy. You're stuck in this emotional jail. And so when you ask me, well, how are people better off in the legal system? It's because in the legal system, there at least is a way of forcing a person to answer to a neutral third party. I can't force my wife into a therapist's office, but I can force my wife into a courtroom. And just because I can force my wife into a courtroom doesn't mean I will. In other words, the threat, the fact that I have the right to make her appear in court may very well be the very thing that gets her into a therapist's office with me, or into a mediator's office, or into the local coffee shop to discuss a resolution on our own, or to come into my lawyer's office with her lawyer. So now that I have the legal system, within it, I have all of these models of dispute resolution, and I can use one of them to force her into a more cooperative or collaborative method of resolving our problems. And by the way, Deb,
Yeah.
When we talk about AFCC, and I'm sure you've said this to some of the guests on the show before, AFCC is an acronym that stands for the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. Very odd name for an organization. Most people don't even know what a conciliation court is. But if I may remind you, conciliation courts are things that once did exist for people that were in toxic marriages, where they can go to a court and say, "Court, judge, we don't want a divorce. We just need a remedy to help our marriage work." And that's what a conciliation court is. Unfortunately, we don't have that anymore. Now we have, the converter doesn't work anymore. I'm going to throw it out. I'm going to buy a new one. So now we have, this marriage isn't working. I'm going to throw it out. I'm going to get another one. And so
that doesn't usually work either.
That's true too. So basically, the legal system, just as a summary of what I just said, the legal system does offer remedies that that people in married relationships where there's a personality disorder don't have as remedies. So
what you're saying, I love what you're saying, but I think also then is you're advising people to retain legal counsel, not to do it on your own and not to try to chase these remedies on your own. You really need this neutral third party, or at least you're an advocate.
In some of the mediations that I've done in my office, forget mediations, let's even talk negotiations. I'm in my office, in our boardroom, me, my client, his ex-spouse or current spouse, and her lawyer. Many of these meetings, I don't do any talking.
Yeah.
And in fact, a fraction of them, and I wish it was higher, but a fraction of them never come back. They worked it out. You know what they needed? They needed to face each other in a room and have an opportunity to speak to each other in a way where they know that, things have really gotten to the point where the lid on the pot has blown off.
Yeah.
And they either need to turn the temperature down or continue down this road. And in some cases, it is about the need for them to get therapy. Sometimes it's joint therapy. Sometimes it's each of them getting their own individual therapist and then having a third therapist that they go to together.
Right. So that must be really gratifying knowing that you could get some couples, to reconcile, which is fabulous.
Yeah, I wonder how often it actually happens. And in Canada, you have this 1-year waiting period, correct?
Well, that's only to get the piece of paper that says the marriage is now dissolved in a word called divorce. Our use in Canada of the word divorce is simply a word that describes a piece of paper that is signed by a judge that says the marriage is dissolved. So to get that piece of paper, yes, you must wait a year unless you can establish cruelty or adultery.
Right.
Most people don't bother because it takes too much work and money to prove those things in an open court, whereas you can get a divorce on a 1-year separation without even having to show up in court.
But you have
People
to live
choose
separate.
the 1 year.
But you have to live separate and apart, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Which isn't very hard to do because some people live separate and apart in different rooms of their same house.
Oh,
exactly.
That's horrible. That's right.
In other words, no sex.
But it's that way in some states in our country, this waiting period.
In fact, if you follow the news, some of the states in the U.S. are now pushing not only the concept of the waiting period, but they're now pushing mandatory counseling and or mediation.
I love it.
So they're basically saying you can't get out of jail, no pun intended, unless you go through this therapeutic program. And by the way, you might decide to stay in this marriage, and instead of viewing it as a jail, it might be the greatest thing ever.
Right.
And indeed it once was, and that's why they decided to get married. So I think it's an interesting thing because we've actually gone full circle. There once was a time, certainly in Canada, where you were not allowed to divorce your husband or your wife unless you can prove fault, unless you could prove cruelty or infidelity. Then as we move forward in life, the social mores changed. People said, well, hold on, why do I have to prove that somebody did something that caused me an injury, verbal, physical, financial? Why do I have to prove injury? Can't I just decide not to live with her any longer and be divorced from her? And then that's where we entered into this realm called no-fault divorce. So now all we need to prove is that I've not been with her for 1 year, and now I can get a divorce. Well, now we're moving to the other place, the place that we once were. We don't want people to get a divorce because when divorce turned to no-fault divorce, the statistics of divorce shot up. So more and more people had gotten divorced. And only recently, by the way, has it plateaued. So we're now at a place where legislators are saying, well, hold on a second. We've got this problem. It's called divorce. It's a problem that is a societal problem. It's not the problem of just Mr. and Mrs. It's the problem of the entire community, the state, and the country. Why? Because people of divorce invariably have children that suffer from the divorce, and then both the parents and the children suffer. They sometimes have medical problems, which is increasing the cost of the medical care system. It's certainly increasing the cost of the mental health system. Plus, it's affecting children's performance in school. It's also affecting the future relationships that these children have because now they've already experienced divorce, so they know what it's all about. So they might be more inclined to divorce when they have relationships. And by the way, it's also increasing the cost of the social services system because some of these people are not getting the proper support they're supposed to be getting. So the social services system has to provide housing and food and money to the people that aren't getting the proper support because they're now living in two homes, which is more expensive than one. So this is a very big problem. So back to you, Steve. This is a problem that legislators right now are looking at and saying, well, hold on a second. We're not going to take away the no-fault notion, but could we at least add a couple extra gates that they have to jump over to get out of it?
Right. Deborah, you had an expert from George Bush's cabinet that is working on this.
Yeah. I was just looking it up on the show because I think it's Steve Gersten and Beverly Willett. We talked about divorce reform.
Right.
.info. I think it's www.divorcereform.info. And basically they advocate for separation counseling to try to get, or marriage counseling to keep the marriage on track. But Stephen Benmor and Steve Peck, I will tell you that I've got a lot of clients that will say to me, and just socially, if I would have known how hard it is to divorce, I might have worked harder at my marriage. So I think it goes back to the fact that people need to really think hard about their decision to separate and like what it means and why they are leaving that marriage. But I also think that people need to think more clearly when they're making that decision to make that commitment to someone. Like, why are you going to spend the rest of your life with someone? Is it because you think that's as good as it gets? Is that because you're looking for someone to take care of you, or you truly, really love them and you want to spend the rest of your life with them? And then you will work through your issues together. So I think there's a lot of things to think about.
There's no one answer for all relationships. And it's very easy for us to make these blanket statements that, you know what, if we all just worked a little bit harder, life would be great. But there's things called infidelity and abuse, financial abuse, distrust, theft, and as you asked, Deb, personality disorders. So these are not things that all fall into the same very comfortable remedy of just saying to these folks, just work harder. Because You know what? If you're married to someone that suffers from depression, it doesn't matter how hard you work. You're living with someone who's suffering from depression.
Yeah.
And unless you're prepared to continue in the way you're going, and unless that person who suffers from depression is prepared to get therapy for it and maybe even start taking prescription medication, you're forever going to be living the very life that you have, and one option is to walk away from it, and that's called divorce. Yeah. And that's a realistic remedy for some people that are dealing with people that suffer from personality disorders, even if they're getting treatment.
Right. And you know what? You're absolutely right. There is no one right answer. And people have to think clearly, though, in terms of what is driving that decision. And I totally agree with you. When there are huge obstacles, personality disorder, when there's theft, there's infidelity, there is, financial abuse, physical abuse. I mean, you don't want to stay there. And those are very valid reasons. But there are also individuals who just say, oh, you know what? I think maybe I can find someone who's better. So maybe I'm just going to leave. And those are individuals that sometimes will say, you know what, I should have thought harder about my decision to leave. I've got clients that will say to me, you know, my partner, he's so nice or she's so wonderful, but you know what, I'm just not happy. And so they really have to explore their decision. But I want to ask you something, Steve. What do you do, back to the personality disorder, when you know that the other side clearly is lying?
Okay, so let's distinguish between somebody who is a pathological liar, a chronic liar, and someone who, by the way, would lie not intentionally, but that's simply a function of their personality disorder. That's one category of person. Yeah. And by the way, many of them exist in the world, and some of them have very happy marriages. And in fact, some would even argue that it's because the person is such a good liar that it keeps the marriage together. Because if they told their wife the truth of what they did today, that might bring about separation. So there are people that lie because it's a function of their illness.
Yeah.
And then there are people that lie for the purposes of achieving a particular goal, like not paying their husband a certain share of their assets or not paying their wife spousal support. That's not really a function of a disorder. That's simply a choice a person makes in order to prefer their own interests over that of the other spouse. And quite frankly, whether the lie comes from someone who is doing it because it's a function of their illness or their health, poor health, or it's coming from someone that's perfectly healthy but just choosing to lie, from a legal standpoint, the response is exactly the same.
Which
and the
is?
response is, don't focus on the lie, focus on establishing in the court of law the truth. Because
that gets very expensive.
It can, and that's why if someone lies, you have to then create two categories. The lies that are unimportant and irrelevant, the lies that affect whether you get to have your children live with you or how much support you should be getting each month. And a lot of times, people don't make that accounting. They don't create the ledger. They don't divide unimportant lies from extremely important lies, and they respond in a very emotional way, and quite frankly, in a very human way. Because if you know what the truth is and someone is feeding you a bowl of lies, it's very hard for you to swallow that.
Yeah.
And you're not going to start dividing up the bowl into two bowls. You're just going to be very upset and respond to all of it. The role of the lawyer is to ask the client, what do you want? What is your finish line? What's your end result? And then the role of the lawyer is to say, okay, I need to prove X, Y, and Z to achieve your goal. And if the client or their spouse are talking about A, B, and C, we got to bring it back to X, Y, and Z. And so if my client wants or needs a certain amount of spousal support, and there are many, many lies coming from the other side, my focus is going to be on what's his income, what's he not disclosing, how is he spending the money that he says he's not disclosing or that he says he doesn't have. And I'm focusing it very surgically, almost like if you were to take a laser light and fine-tune it so it's a really small dot, and fine-tune it to what you need, and disregard all of the distraction, all of the lies about how great of a father or great of a mother he or she was, or that she spent too much or he didn't spend enough. There's a lot of lies that are unimportant. It's kind of like, separating the wheat from the chaff. And that's what we have to do. And at the end of the day, the client has to understand two things. One, you're not going to be able to prove that every lie is a lie.
Right.
But we will be able to achieve a goal. And so at the end of the day, at the end of their life, everyone's going to know what the truth was. In fact, many times the lawyers and the judges don't know what the real truth is.
Okay, so let me ask you something. I'm going to just play a little bit of devil's advocate
Sure.
here. So, like lawyers are bound by ethics, right? They should be. So if you clearly know that there is lying on the other side, And, I see that a lot of lawyers are collegial, like they've got good relationships with each other. Can you be pretty honest with your colleague and say, come on, I know your client is not playing fair. Isn't it in the lawyer's sometimes isn't it the lawyer's responsibility to make his or her client play fair?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that it's never always black and white. So when she says that I earn $90,000, I earn $80,000, and the lawyer argues for him that he's earning 80, and the other lawyer says no, it's 90. It's not black and white. Who's right and who's wrong? In fact, it might be neither of 80 or 90. It might be 110, or it might be 60. The fact of the matter is, when you talk about ethics, a lawyer has no right. In fact, a lawyer has a duty to withdraw himself from a case if a client tells him to lie. If a client tells him, I make 90, but I want you to go into court and tell the judge I make 80, the lawyer cannot do that. If the lawyer does it, the lawyer can be disciplined and even lose their license to practice law. So then you have clients that will not tell the lawyer the truth and ask them to lie. They'll just tell them the lie.
Yeah.
And now we're expecting the lawyer to now become an investigator to determine whether what the client is telling them is true or not true. And the lawyer is not an investigator. In fact, the rules of ethics compel us to accept what our clients tell us and only do a very marginal or shallow scrutiny of what they're telling us. So if a client tells me, when the kids were born, I was at home with them after work from 5 o'clock onwards until the next morning, and now the kids are 7 or 8 or 9, I'm going to go to court and I'm going to argue that my client was a very involved father. He came home after work every day and was taking care of the kids until he went to work the next morning. First of all, I don't have the ability to determine what occurred 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And even if I did have the ability, for example, hire investigators to go and interview the neighbors or anybody that was nearby, is this true? Did this client come home at 5 o'clock? Or did he come home at 7 o'clock? Or did he go out in the middle of the night to play cards with his friends? Like, that's not my job. I'm not going to go and investigate what my client is telling me as to what the truth was many years ago. But back to your question, Deb, if my client tells me one thing and tells me one thing to be the truth and tells me to tell the court something different, I can't do that.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Now, I wrote about this in The Smart Divorce, where I felt that, from the other side, there was some, let's just say, misinformation. So one day I went to my lawyer and I told him a story, quote unquote, a little story. And he said, is that true? And me, I blush and, I stumbled over my words, and he knew for sure that I kind of made something up. He said, is that true? And I said, no, but, how come the other side can get away with it and I can't? So it was a bit of a frustration, and he got it, but, I guess he couldn't do anything about it. And so,
well, like I said, he can do something about it, but you need to figure out which column he's going to do something about it on. Is it the column of irrelevant, unimportant facts that the person is lying about, or is it the column that goes directly to what your goal is? And if your goal is to have custody of your children and a certain amount of support, then let's focus in on the lies there and prove those lies false.
So at the end of the day, you really need to do, and I say treat divorce like a business transaction, so you need to do your cost-benefit analysis.
Correct, and your due diligence.
Yeah.
If you're going to use the business purchase as an example, then you want to know what the expenses and sales of the company are. You want to know how many customers are coming in and out.
Right.
There might be facts about the purchase of a business that are not all that important, like who supplies you with the napkins. That maybe won't determine whether you buy this business. So you need to figure out what goes to your goal.
Yeah.
Keep your eye on your goal, tell your lawyer what you want, and then tell your lawyer what your evidence will be. And then when the other evidence comes in, lies or otherwise, you ask your client, can we disprove that? And if so, how?
So I guess at the end of the day, it's having realistic expectations, and you need to work on that at the outset of your divorce with your lawyer to figure out what's realistic and what isn't, and what you can truly expect as a resolution.
That's right. That's right.
But the other thing you said, which was really interesting, and I know that through my research, and I talked about this in the Smart Divorce, is that oftentimes, especially with difficult personalities, you seem to find a lawyer with the same characteristics as the difficult personality. So if you're a bit of a control freak, you're going to find a lawyer that's a bit of a control freak, and and all those kinds of things. You can go to the
other end of the extreme, Deb. It could be the person that is extremely non-confrontational and conciliatory. The nice guy.
Yeah.
The nice guy will find the nice guy lawyer who is now battling with the not nice guy, confrontational, adversarial lawyer. Well, that's an imbalance.
So what do you do for that? So if you've got a lawyer that you feel is reasonable and the other side doesn't have a reasonable lawyer, what do you do?
Pray.
Well, my experience is that, the common denominator here is morality and fairness. Yeah. And even the unreasonable lawyer will one day stand up in front of the reasonable judge who will be scolded for being unreasonable. And it happens all the time.
Yeah, interesting.
It happens all the time, and I'll tell you, lately, I've been reading more and more judicial decisions where judges have actually piped in on that subject. There once was a time when judges didn't want to be involved with that. They didn't want to be the schoolyard attendant who was trying to make the peace between the lawyers. It wasn't their business. They were there to adjudicate on cases. They were not there to address conflict between lawyers. But lately, judges have done more of that because it's actually now interfering with their ability to do their job. And now judges have actually gone one step further. Judges are now not only dealing with it in court, they're writing it into their decisions, and they're reporting it to the Law Society, which regulates and governs lawyers.
That's
and
great.
Has the power to discipline them.
Oh my God, so this just answers a question. So I am now working with lawyers across North America. They're referring their clients to me, and I'm coaching them through divorce on the emotional side, so they can, the lawyers can focus on the legal side and do what's, important for the client. So I'm like the emotional sweeper. And, I'll say to lawyers, so what's the pain? Like, what makes sometimes the file so difficult? And I was expecting to hear expectations, like unrealistic expectations or the emotions from the client. And you know what they're telling me? I've heard this now twice in the last day. Two very well-respected lawyers, they said to me, oh, lawyer on the other side. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And so now I understand why.
Just in the last few weeks, I'm going to read you a quotation from a case that I read. The judge writes, quote, "I regret any embarrassment the publication of this decision may cause the lawyer, but it is important to send a specific message to that lawyer and a general message to the public that this is not the way family law is to be conducted, and in the rare cases where counsel act this way, the court will voice its disapproval. Wow. It is essential that family law litigants and counsel have confidence that they will be treated fairly during a difficult process." Close quote.
Good for that judge.
Absolutely.
But just to give you the other side of this, and I don't mean to defend lawyers that are being discourteous, rude, or acting as though they're the vanguard of their client and they've got to fight their fight for them because the client feels injustice, so therefore the lawyer needs to also equally feel charged to take the task of being their bulldog. I don't support that notion, but let's not forget what the legal system is. What's the model here? This is not an inquisitorial system where the government hires an investigator to collect the information and to render a set of recommendations, like when something like a problem with water treatment in a city occurs and people are poisoned by high levels of chemicals in the water. that will be an inquisitorial system. The government will appoint somebody or a team of people, engineers, to study the problem and to provide a conclusion. In the legal system, it's adversarial, not inquisitorial. And the idea behind the adversarial system is that by each side fighting tooth and nail for their ownership of the truth, the adjudicator, that is the judge, will ultimately be able to discern what the truth is and make a responsible, genuine decision on the facts.
Yeah.
And so some people take that to the extremes, and of course they are too adversarial, too aggressive, too unfair, and too discourteous. And that's where you've gone too far.
Yeah. I've learned a lot today. This has been really amazing. Thank you.
Deb, can we talk about the listener question we had?
Yeah. So, you talked about, Stephen, at the very beginning, we talked about divorce not necessarily being an answer to all, but, we talked about the ending of a relationship. And I'm doing some research on another book, and that's, that the divorce rate rises with each subsequent marriage. So in Canada, it's 40%. The first-time marriage is 40% divorce rate. In the U.S., it's 50%. Second time, it's 60% divorce rate for another marriage. And third time, it's 70%. It's amazing. So what happens when you are married and, for another time, and you're raising now stepchildren? And that relationship ends? What are your responsibilities as a parent, as a step parent for, and I know this is not like just an easy answer, but for spousal support and for child support?
And that came, Stephen, from a listener. They have this real world situation going on right now. And in this case, it's a stay-at-home father. And they're now in the process of divorce, but they both had their children of their own. Sure. And now he's left and at home, and of course she wants him to sell the home, but he's looking for spousal support and child support for the stepchild. And some people, when they hear that, they go, what? I mean, I shouldn't have to pay for someone else's kid. And so is that true? Does that really happen?
Well, let's back up a second. This is the sort of advice or information that regrettably people don't receive until it's too late. Because the reality is, we live in a world where people, even if they marry for the first time, in some cases, there's a child from another relationship in this new relationship. And the new partner, who is not the father or the mother to the child, takes on that role, whether they wanted to or not. They loved the person that they fell in love with. That came with a child. They treat that child as their own, because they love the child's parent. And so they formed a family unit, which is lovely. In fact, it would be very strange, almost inhumane, for the new partner to not treat the child as his or her own, because it would seem as though it would be like they would be operating two different family units in the home. He would be with her mother, and this child would be who to him. So it's actually quite common for people to enter into relationships where there's a child from another relationship. And in some cases, that the other parent, the parent that's not in this relationship, the former partner, may not even be in the child's life. And so in those cases, that person oftentimes does not know that there could be a legal responsibility to the child should they split up. But the fact is, at least in Ontario, there is. And it's so clear that the legislation has been changed so that it actually provides express language that says if you've treated the child as your own, then you are financially responsible. What's open-ended and unclear, until each case is decided on its own merits, is how much and for how long. So if you split up with someone and you've been the social father or social mother, not biological, we call it social parent, to the child for a period of years, the real question is, did you treat the child as your own? And if so, what's the appropriate remedy on the subject of child support? Should you pay child support for X amount of months, for X dollars, not at all, full amount? What's the interrelationship with the support that's being paid by the biological parent who's not in a relationship? What's the interplay? Like, if should each father pay the same amount, or should the full amount be divided in half? And that's not clear. And that's where it depends on each case, depends on the budget of the child, depends on the income of the biological parent in the relationship, and it depends on the amount of support paid by the biological parent who should be responsible for child support before the social parent.
So bottom line is every fact situation is different. Every situation has its own facts. And, Stephen, I guess our listener really needs legal advice by a very knowledgeable lawyer.
Well, and it's really a different kind of case because it's flipped, isn't it? I mean, we're very used to the opposite being true, but not the guy who's the stay-at-home father so much.
I don't even take anything out of the genders here. Whether it's the father or the mother, whether the mother brought the child in a relationship or the father brought the child, the gender is not relevant. What is relevant is, was there a newly formed parent-child relationship, and is there a need for there to be financial support in order to preserve the status quo for the child? And let's not forget what the policy behind this is. The policy is this: if the person truly did treat the child as their own, and if the person did truly support this child financially, and now that financial support is gone, poof, missing, what's the impact on the child?
Yeah.
And the court is trying to protect the child by having the social parent maintain the very same support that he or she provided prior to their separation. Because, again, the focus is on the child, and this child shouldn't all of a sudden suffer a major drop in their standard of living because their parents made a decision, adult decision, to split up.
Right.
Certainly something to think about. So is that the new term now, social parent versus step-parent?
It's one of the many terms, because for years the notion of step-parent gave it the sense that it was permanent, that it was conclusive. The notion of step-parenting is much more of a spectrum.
Yeah.
You have people that are dating, you have people that are living together, you've got same-sex partners, some might bring a child into the relationship. It's not so clear if somebody really is choosing to treat the child as their own, but absolutely, there's not the word step-parent has been there's been more words added to describe that person. There's the word putative, P-U-T-A-T-I-V-E. There's the obvious word non-biological parent. There's the word psychological parent to describe the relationship. So there's been many forms. But yeah, step-parent and social parent are the two most popular ones, though.
Well, thank you for that. That was really helpful. I've really learned a lot today, Stephen.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Appreciate your coming on the show.
You got it.
Stephen Benmor, an amazing attorney. We learned a lot today, Deb.
It was very informative. I told you, compassionate, caring, informative. He's a great lawyer. And you know what? I didn't ask him for his contact details. But if any listeners want to get in touch with Stephen, it's benmorlaw.com. And I'll have it on the liner notes where you can get in touch with him and his email address and everything else.
I bet you that a lot of those social parents or step-parents are going to be very surprised to learn that in Canada, for sure, but in some parts of the United States as well, will have to pay child support for a child that isn't their biological child.
Yeah, especially, they're treating them like their own. So it's definitely something that people need to think about in terms of what that means longer term, and maybe, and I hate to be really negative, but when you are making that commitment, you think about all the ramifications, and you really think long and hard about your responsibility to the children.
Right. But
you know what that means.
But you really, we've been doing these shows for a long time. It kind of came to me as a surprise that you would have to pay for someone else's child, when a marriage breaks up. And in fact, in the United States, I think in many states you don't have to.
Well, I will tell you something. I had a client who was on her third divorce, and she was collecting child support from, obviously the biological father, and then her second, the second, what is it called? The social parent. So she was getting child support from two men and now trying to get for a third. But, as I said, I'm talking to a lot of lawyers now supporting their clients through divorce. And I had one lawyer tell me that he is working with a client who's under 50 on her fifth divorce. Oh. And she's now a millionaire because she's collecting a lot of spousal support.
Oh, boy.
So
some people know how to work all the angles.
Yeah, so much to think about. So I am bringing you lots of fabulous people, bringing our listeners concepts to think about and how to go through divorce in a much smarter way, how to be holistic and have positive outcomes for a happier, healthier future.
And for first-time listeners that may just be hearing Deb for the first time, she's been doing the show now for a couple of years on Divorce Source Radio, but she's the author of The Smart Divorce and The Smart Divorce Resource Toolkit, which you can find on her website, thesmartdivorce.com. And what else do you have to get in touch with you, Deb? You're on Facebook and all over
Facebook,
the world.
Twitter, follow me, or just call me, 905-695-0270, or send me an email, info@thesmartdivorce.com.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Deborah. As always, I look forward to our next show.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
As always, I hope the program helped you. If you have a comment or question you'd like to ask us, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave us a voicemail on our listener line at area code 248-686-2256. Or drop us an email with your question or comment to divorcesourceradio@gmail.com. New programs are available every week on divorcesourceradio.com, as well as iTunes, BlackBerry, Stitcher, and all over the web. If you'd like to be notified when new programs are available, you can follow us on Twitter. Our follow word is Divorce Source. Also, if you're not listening from our website, I invite you to stop by divorcesourceradio.com, where you'll find a complete program archive. If you're looking for a specific subject, simply type it into our search engine, and chances are you'll find what you're looking for. We also have other resources available at our website as well. And while you're on our website, click on the Facebook icon and join the growing Divorce Source Radio Facebook community. Thanks for listening. Until next time, make it a great week and stay healthy. I'm Steve Peck.